They said I was too old to understand next-gen fabrication, that my instincts were obsolete. 3 weeks after they fired me, every printer in the facility went dark, and I was the only one who could bring them back online. But I didn't return to save my job. I returned to expose something much bigger. My name is Elliot Crane. For 17 years, I was the Senior Additive Manufacturing Specialist at Vanguard Materials Lab in Redwood Grove. That's a fancy way of saying I ran their 3D printing department, since before most people had even heard of 3D printing. I built that department from a single experimental unit in the corner of the fabrication floor to an 8-machine operation that produced precision components for aerospace, medical devices, and military applications. I personally developed the calibration protocols, wrote half the operating software, and knew every quirk of every machine. I could tell which printer was running just by the sound it made, like how some people can identify cars by their engines. When Brandon Keeley was hired as our new department supervisor, I knew trouble was brewing. 32 years old with an MBA and precisely 0 manufacturing experience. But the executive team loved his fresh perspective. During his first week, he barely spoke to me. During his second week, he spent most of his time typing notes into his tablet while watching me work. During his third week, he called me into his glass-walled office. "Elliot, we need to discuss the future direction of the department," he said, not looking up from his screen. "Sure thing," I replied, taking a seat. "I've been meaning to talk to you about the upgrades we need for printers 3 and 7. They're our oldest units, and the temperature regulation—" "That's not what I mean," he interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. "I'm talking about modernization, innovation, next-generation fabrication techniques. I'm actually testing a new sintering method on printer 5 that could reduce post-processing by 30%, I offered. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Look, Elliot, I'll be direct. The company is moving in a new direction. We need younger ideas, people who understand the future of this technology, not just its past." "Younger ideas?" I repeated, feeling heat rise in my chest. "I've been in this field since the beginning. I literally wrote the calibration standards we use." "That's exactly my point," Keeley said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "You're rooted in old methods. We need disruptive approaches, cloud integration, AI-enhanced design parameters." "Those aren't real improvements. They're buzzwords," I said. "Our clients care about precision, reliability, and material properties, not whether we used an algorithm with a trendy name." His smile vanished. "HR will be contacting you about the severance package. We'll need you to clear out your desk by the end of the day." Just like that. 17 years erased in a 15-minute conversation filled with empty corporate jargon. They didn't even let me complete the projects I was working on. Security watched as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, then escorted me to the parking lot like I was some kind of threat. As I drove home that day, passing the redwoods that gave our town its name, a strange calm settled over me. Deep down, I knew they'd come to regret this decision, but I had no idea how quickly or dramatically that regret would arrive. The thing about industrial 3D printing that most people don't understand is that it's not just about pushing a button and watching an object appear. It's a complex dance of materials, science, mechanical engineering, software, and something that can only be described as instinct. You develop a feel for the machines over time. You learn their personalities. Take our printer number 4. It ran perfectly as long as the ambient humidity stayed below 60%. But on rainy days, you needed to adjust the extruder temperature up by exactly 3.5 degrees. No more, no less. Printer 6 would occasionally pause mid-print until you tapped, not hit, just tapped, the right side of its housing. Something about a loose connection in the motion controller that no repair technician could ever locate. These weren't flaws. They were characteristics. Like knowing your old car needs the key turned just so to start on cold mornings. My late wife, Talia, used to joke that I talked to those printers more than I talked to her. She wasn't entirely wrong. After she passed from ovarian cancer 5 years ago, those machines became even more of my life. I'd spend 14-hour days in the lab, tweaking parameters, developing new techniques, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with layered manufacturing. I kept a small framed photo of Talia on my desk at work. It showed her laughing, head thrown back, during a hiking trip in Yosemite. That photo was one of the items I packed in my cardboard box on the day they fired me. When I got home, I placed it on my kitchen counter and told her, "Well, looks like I'm going to have more time for those woodworking projects I've been putting off." In truth, I felt lost. My identity had been wrapped up in that job for so long that I wasn't sure who I was without it. But I still had my pride, and that was enough to keep me from begging for my position back. The first call came 4 days after my termination. It was Colton, one of the younger technicians I'd trained. He was calling from his personal phone, voice hushed like he was sharing state secrets. "Elliot, Printer 2 is producing parts with a weird layer shift. Everything's coming out warped, and I've tried all the usual fixes." "Did you check the belt tension on the y-axis?" I asked. "First thing I tried. Then I recalibrated the bed, updated the firmware, even swapped out the control board with a spare. Nothing's working." "What does Keeley say?" There was a pause. "He says it's a temporary issue, and we should just use the other machines while IT looks into it." I laughed without humor. "IT. Those guys can barely keep our email running." "So, any suggestions?" Colton asked hopefully. I considered helping, then remembered my badge being deactivated, the security escort, the cardboard box. "Sorry, Colton. I don't work there anymore. Good luck with it." I ended the call feeling simultaneously guilty and vindicated. Part of me wanted to help. I'd trained Colton from his first day, watched him grow from a nervous college grad into a competent technician. But a louder part reminded me that my expertise hadn't been valued. Let them figure it out themselves. By the end of that week, Colton wasn't the only one calling. I heard from 3 other team members, each reporting different issues with different machines. Printer 5 was suddenly overheating. Printer 3 had developed a mysterious clicking in its feed mechanism. Printer 7 was somehow producing parts that were exactly 7.2% smaller than their specified dimensions. I ignored most of these calls. Occasionally, I'd offer a vague suggestion, but nothing substantial. Let Keeley's younger ideas solve these problems. 12 days after my firing, I was in my garage, working on a jewelry box I'd been designing for my daughter's birthday, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was after 8 p.m., which seemed strange for a work call, but curiosity got the better of me. "Elliot Crane," I answered. "Mr. Crane, this is Brandon Keeley from Vanguard." His voice had lost the confident edge I remembered from our last conversation. "I know who you are, Brandon." I continued, sanding the delicate walnut lid of the jewelry box. "We've been experiencing some technical difficulties with the printing systems." "So I've heard." There was an uncomfortable silence before he continued. "Our production schedule is severely impacted. We've had to reject nearly 40% of parts due to quality issues." "That sounds expensive," I noted, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in my voice. "We've brought in external consultants, but they haven't been able to identify the root causes." "Consultants usually can't," I said. "They don't know the history, the quirks. Each industrial setup is unique." Another pause. "We'd like to bring you in as a consultant to help resolve these issues." Now it was my turn to pause, setting down my sandpaper. "You fired me because you wanted younger ideas. Now you want my old, obsolete experience?" "The situation has evolved," he said carefully. "We're willing to pay your standard consulting rate." I didn't have a standard consulting rate, but I quickly invented one. $250 an hour, minimum 6-hour blocks, paid in advance. Plus a non-disclosure agreement that explicitly allows me to use this experience in future consulting work. "That's steep," he stammered. "So is rejecting 40% of your production? How many contracts are at risk? What's the overtime costing you? How many emergency shipments?" The silence told me everything. "I'll have the paperwork ready in the morning," he finally said. When I walked back into Vanguard 3 weeks after being escorted out, the atmosphere had transformed. The once orderly production floor now resembled a war room. Technicians with dark circles under their eyes huddled around malfunctioning machines. White boards covered in diagrams and troubleshooting notes lined the walls. In one corner, 2 people I didn't recognize, presumably the external consultants, were arguing over a disassembled control unit. Keeley met me at the department entrance, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His crisp button-down was wrinkled, and his perfectly styled hair now stuck out at odd angles. "Thank you for coming in," he said stiffly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Let's see what we're dealing with," I replied, already moving toward the center of the room. For the next few hours, I systematically assessed each machine, taking notes and occasionally asking questions of the exhausted technicians. I didn't offer solutions yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of the problems. And if I'm being honest, I wanted them to sweat a little longer. What I discovered was worse than I'd anticipated. 7 of our 8 printers were malfunctioning in different ways. The only one still working properly was our oldest unit, Printer 1, which ran on a legacy operating system that had never been updated. That detail caught my attention immediately. "When did these issues start?" I asked Colton, as we examined Printer 4's thermal regulation system. "They began gradually after you left," he said quietly, glancing toward Keeley, who was hovering nearby. "But they really accelerated about 10 days ago, after the system updates." System updates. This was the first I'd heard of any updates. "What updates?" Colton looked uncomfortable. "The new software integration from our Argonix systems." That name meant nothing to me. "Who authorized this?" Before Colton could answer, Keeley stepped forward. "I did. Argonix is a leading optimization consultant for advanced manufacturing. They provided a proprietary software suite to streamline our operations and improve efficiency." "Without testing it first?" I asked incredulously. "We ran their diagnostic package, which showed potential gains of up to 28% in throughput," Keeley defended. "Their client list includes defense contractors and medical device manufacturers." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you installed unknown software across our entire production system without a phased implementation or backup protocol?" His silence was answer enough. "I need access to all the Argonix documentation," I said, "and I want to see the original implementation proposal." For the next few hours, I dug through technical specifications, update logs, and system architecture diagrams. What I found didn't make sense. At least, not if Argonix was actually trying to help Vanguard. The software changes weren't just poorly implemented. They seemed deliberately designed to create subtle malfunctions. Changes to thermal regulation algorithms, minute adjustments to motion control parameters, modifications to how material flow was calculated, all small enough to pass a cursory review, but significant enough to wreak havoc in actual production. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Buried in the networking protocols was a data transmission routine that had nothing to do with printer optimization. Every time a new design was loaded into the system, a copy was being sent to an external server. Vanguard wasn't just experiencing technical failures, they were being robbed of their intellectual property. I needed more evidence before making accusations. Using my old admin credentials, which surprisingly still worked, I accessed the network logs and traced the data transmissions. Over the past 10 days, dozens of proprietary designs had been transmitted to an IP address that, when I traced it through several proxies, led back to a subsidiary of our main competitor. Argonix Systems wasn't a consulting firm. It was a shell company created to infiltrate our systems and steal our technology. It was nearly midnight when I finally gathered enough evidence. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only Keeley, myself, and a couple of technicians who were too invested in solving the problems to leave. "We need to talk," I told Keeley, gesturing toward his office, "in private." Once the door closed, I connected my laptop to his display screen and laid out what I'd found. The deliberate sabotage, the data theft, the connection to our competitor. "This isn't just a technical issue," I concluded. "It's industrial espionage." Keeley's face had grown increasingly pale as I presented the evidence. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look at the data yourself," I said, turning the screen toward him. "They've been siphoning every new design that enters the system. Military components, medical devices, all of it." He slumped into his chair. "I've compromised company security. My career is over." "Your career is the least of our concerns right now," I said sharply. "We need to contain this breach before more damage is done." "What do you suggest?" "First, we disconnect every machine from the network. Second, we wipe and rebuild the entire system from clean backups, assuming you have those." He nodded weakly. "Standard procedure requires weekly backups." "Good. Then I need complete authority to restructure the system architecture. No interference, no questions." "That will halt production entirely," he protested. "Production is already compromised," I countered, "and every minute we delay is another minute your competitors have access to our designs." He didn't argue further. By morning, I had authorization to do whatever was necessary to fix the situation. For the next 7 days, I barely left the facility. I slept on a cot in the corner of the lab, surviving on vending machine snacks and the terrible coffee from the break room. The first day was spent disconnecting systems and preserving evidence. The next 3 were devoted to wiping every machine and reinstalling clean operating systems from backups predating the Argonix intrusion. But I didn't just restore the systems to their previous state. I improved them. I implemented authentication protocols I'd been advocating for years. I rewrote sections of code that had always been inefficient. I documented every quirk and characteristic of each machine, creating a proper manual instead of relying on institutional knowledge. And I added one special modification. Instead of merely blocking the data theft, I programmed the system to feed false information to any attempt at extraction. If Argonix tried to steal designs now, they'd receive subtly flawed versions, components with impossible tolerances, materials specified that would fail under normal conditions, dimensional errors that wouldn't be apparent until manufacturing was attempted. Let them waste time and resources trying to produce parts that could never work. A little revenge seemed appropriate under the circumstances. By the end of the week, all 8 printers were back online and functioning better than ever. The first test runs produced parts of exceptional quality, with tighter tolerances than we'd previously been able to achieve. The technicians were amazed, but I wasn't. This was how the machines were supposed to work when properly understood and maintained. On the morning of my 8th day back at Vanguard, I walked into Keeley's office with a thumb drive and a comprehensive report. "Everything's fixed," I said, placing both items on his desk. "Production can resume at full capacity. This report details all the changes I've made and includes complete documentation for each system." He looked exhausted but relieved. Thank you, Elliot. Truly. I've spoken with upper management, and they've authorized me to offer you your position back, with a substantial raise and a promotion to department director. I shook my head. I'm not interested. But we need you. These past few days have made that abundantly clear. What you need is on that thumb drive, I said, pointing to it. Complete documentation, operating procedures, maintenance schedules, everything required to run the department properly. Documentation isn't the same as experience, he argued. No, it's not. But it's what you have now. I leaned forward, placing my hands on his desk. The thumb drive also contains all the evidence of Argonix's industrial espionage, which I've already forwarded to the FBI's Cyber Division and Intellectual Property Rights Unit. His eyes widened. You contacted the FBI? Criminal theft of classified designs, absolutely. They're very interested, especially given the military contracts involved. He slumped back in his chair. The company will want to handle this internally, quietly. That's not your decision anymore, I said firmly, or mine. And you should prepare for some difficult conversations with federal agents. What about you? He asked. What will you do now? I smiled for the first time in our conversation. I'm starting my own consulting firm, Crane Engineering Solutions, specializing in advanced additive manufacturing systems. You'll be our competitor. No, I corrected him. I'll be the expert people call when their systems fail because they prioritized buzzwords over experience. When they need someone who understands that machines aren't just collections of parts and code, but complex systems with their own peculiarities. I stood up and extended my hand. This is my last day here, Brandon. My invoice for this week's work is included in the report. I trust there won't be any issues with payment. He rose and shook my hand, his grip firmer than I expected. No issues. And Elliot, I was wrong about you. About a lot of things. Yes, I agreed simply. You were. As I walked out of Vanguard Materials Lab for the final time, I felt lighter than I had in years. No security escort this time. No cardboard box of personal belongings. Just the satisfaction of knowing I'd fixed what was broken and exposed what was corrupt. 3 days later, I received a call from Acera Aerospace in Colorado. They'd heard about my new consulting firm, News Travels Fast in Specialized Industries, and wanted to discuss setting up a state-of-the-art additive manufacturing facility from scratch. We're looking for someone with deep experience, the caller explained. Someone who understands the technology beyond the marketing hype. That sounds like the right approach, I replied, already mentally sketching possible configurations. We've had some unfortunate experiences with consultants who promised cutting-edge solutions, but delivered systems our team couldn't actually use effectively. I smiled to myself. I focus on systems that work reliably in the real world, not just in presentations. We scheduled a meeting for the following week in Denver. Before hanging up, the caller added, "One of our board members mentioned you were let go from Vanguard recently. Said something about them wanting younger ideas. Their loss is apparently significant, based on what we're hearing about their current situation. News really does travel fast. Sometimes experience matters more than buzzwords," I said. At Acera, we tend to agree. After ending the call, I returned to my garage workshop, where the walnut jewelry box for my daughter was now nearly complete. The delicate hinges were installed, the interior lined with dark blue velvet, the exterior polished to a warm glow. I had designed a special compartment in the lid that contained a small 3D printed pendant, a miniature replica of the Yosemite Valley where her mother's ashes were scattered. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the connection between traditional craftsmanship and the advanced technology I'd spent my career perfecting. Both required patience, understanding, and respect for materials. Both rewarded experience. My phone chimed with an email notification. The contract from Acera had arrived for my review. As I opened my laptop to read it, I noticed a news alert. Federal agents raid offices of tech firm in industrial espionage investigation. The accompanying photo showed Argonix Systems headquarters with FBI agents carrying out boxes of evidence. Justice moves quickly sometimes. I closed the news site and turned my attention to the contract, which offered terms far more favorable than anything Vanguard had ever provided. Full creative control over system design, a recognition of intellectual property rights for any new processes I developed, and a compensation package that acknowledged the true value of my expertise. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being fired had ultimately freed me from constraints I hadn't fully recognized. Now I could work on my own terms, bringing my knowledge to companies that actually valued it. I thought about Keeley and his quest for younger ideas. He wasn't entirely wrong. Innovation is essential. But innovation built on a foundation of experience is far more valuable than innovation for its own sake. The best systems combine fresh approaches with hard-won knowledge, something he might now understand, if somewhat painfully. As darkness fell outside my workshop, I made the final adjustments to my daughter's jewelry box. I had started this project years ago, but never found the time to complete it while working at Vanguard. Now, it was finally ready. Much like I was finally ready for this new chapter in my life. Sometimes being pushed out of what's familiar is exactly what you need to build something better. Sometimes, the most valuable ideas aren't the youngest, but the most tested. And sometimes, the machines you understand most deeply are the ones that have challenged you the most. I closed the jewelry box with a satisfying click and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new systems to understand, new problems to solve. But tonight, I had completed something important, a tangible reminder that creation takes time, patience, and care. Just like rebuilding a career at 53. I took one last look at the finished jewelry box before heading inside. It wasn't perfect. Nothing truly valuable ever is. But its imperfections were part of its character. Much like the quirks of those printers I'd come to know so well over 17 years. Much like the journey that had brought me here. They said I was too old to understand next-gen fabrication, that my instincts were obsolete. What they failed to understand was that technology without context is just machinery. Innovation without experience is just untested theory. I didn't go back to save my job. I went back to prove that understanding runs deeper than buzzwords, that expertise can't be replicated with algorithms, and that some problems can only be solved by those who have seen them before. As I locked up my workshop and headed inside, my phone buzzed with another message. A colleague from a materials science conference last year, reaching out about possible collaboration. Word was spreading about crane engineering solutions faster than I had anticipated. I smiled as I typed a response. This wasn't an ending forced upon me. This was a beginning I was finally ready for. And unlike the systems I'd left behind at Vanguard, this one would be built right from the start, with both innovation and experience working together, rather than at odds. Sometimes being fired isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's exactly what you need to write a better one.